For this sample, we're going to be doing a sample of understitching. Understitching is used often on the yokes of skirts to hold the facing down. It can also be used on shirts, such as collars or cuffs, to make sure that the facing of either of those will also stay down. So you are going to be using 18B, A and 18B. 18A is the facing and 18B is the garment. So in this case, 18B will be in blue, this is the garment, and 18A is in maroon, and this is the facing. So we are going to match up our notches with right sides together. Go ahead and pin along the edge. We want to make sure that the edges match up all the way across so that when the facing does get turned over, that it does not create any bubbles within our material. So this is a normal stitch. We're going to stitch at 5/8 of an inch. We are sewing two things together, so we will be back stitching. Go ahead and back stitch. Make sure to pull the pins as you get to them. When you get to the end, go ahead and back stitch. So now you have your plain seam, garment is blue, and your facing is red. The next thing we want to do is we're going to be taking the facing and bringing it over the seam. So make sure the seam still lays flat. We're going to bring the facing over the seam. So if I lift up my facing, you can see that my seam is still underneath it. The next step that we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing an edge stitch on the facing, but we're going to be stitching the facing to the seam underneath. So the reason it's called an understitch is because you're stitching the facing, the red, to the seam that's underneath it. So just to make sure again, seam is laying flat, facing is pulled over. I'm going to be doing an edge stitch. Remember, an edge stitch is very close to the edge, so it's 1/8, so it's the inside toe. Since we are stitching two things together, I will be back stitching. Back stitch. Make sure to keep pulling your facing nice and flat. You don't want to put stress on it, but you want to make sure that it's not going to be creating any puckers along the way. Back stitch at the back. So now you can see that I did an edge stitch on my facing. My facing is now sewn to the seam that was underneath it. The last step to this sample is that you're going to actually fold this over. Remember, facings are not meant to be seen. Now that you have sewn the facing to the seam underneath it, it's going to actually naturally pull that facing down. So you're going to go ahead and press this into place. I press this into place. You can see that the edge of my facing and my garment is very clean on the top. My understitching is not visible from the front of the garment, and my facing is secured because it is pulled down and it is being held basically into place by the seam that is holding it over. This is called understitching because, again, you stitched the facing to what was underneath it, which was the seam allowance, and then it was folded over, which created a nice clean seam. This is done often, again, on skirts and on shirts.